Welcome to the McAfee Center Stage webinar series. My name is Austin and I'll be your facilitator. This webinar is a brief overview covering the common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing, as it is not possible to cover all detailed scenarios in an hour. If assistance is needed, please contact McAfee Technical Support. Our presenter today is Jim Olmsted. Jim has over 25 years of experience in performance of security assessments, building security roadmaps, conducting investigations, performing digital forensics, and incident response support services for government and commercial entities. He has in-depth knowledge and experience in preparing for legal proceedings in both the areas of criminal and civil investigations. So ladies and gentlemen, Jim Olmsted.
Thanks, Austin. So today we're going to go over a few things for the agenda, talk a little bit about the McAfee active cyber threat services, industries and verticals, and the impact to organizations, types of attacks, are they getting more sophisticated, common mistakes companies make. I mean, I don't know if I want to say that they make, but maybe challenges that organizations have related to resourcing, funding, and internal communications. The next part would be our approach during incident management and overall some recommendations as we go through the various aspects. So about us, McAfee Foundstone. We're under rebranding, so McAfee Advanced Cyber Threat Services is the name moving forward. However, many people still refer to us as Foundstone across the globe, so we are that part of the organization. We were acquired many years ago as being a group of certified and experienced experts in information security and strategic consulting, but we're all one big McAfee family, so we're integrated. While we may look at a variety of vendor agnostic services and tools, we're also deeply integrated into McAfee, so we also leverage the tool sets that you own as a McAfee customer, as well as those tool sets that may not be McAfee owned and controlled. Basically, we have covered, or as part of our response services and proactive and reactive, we handle strategic assessments, emergency incident response, incident management, crisis management, reverse engineering of malware, cybersecurity maturity assessments. As part of our incident response services, we have retainers, so we're ready to go if you need us to come out. But we also have, as part of, whether it's part of a retainer service or an a la carte, we can help plan, assess, see what your development is for your organization, and also conduct proactive threat hunting across your network, your live network traffic, as well as endpoints and servers. We perform a variety of reviews, security architecture reviews, review of server configurations, and overall operating system reviews. All of our methods and techniques are tied to various frameworks. So whether you have a requirement of using ISO, NIST, PCI compliance, HIPAA, meaningful use assessments, they're all tied to standard frameworks and governance requirements as we perform our assessments. Overall, we also offer training. So we offer training into incident response, malware analysis and reverse engineering of malware, penetration testing, security operations center reviews and assessments, and a variety of other assessments that we perform and services that we perform. With that, I want to jump into some of the verticals and the impact that we've seen over the last 12 months. Regions that we cover heavily in North America. However, we also have consultants in Europe covering Africa and the Middle East. We routinely have engagements where we have consultants in the region work on projects, but if we have to plus up or send people with different expertises, we can go through, have people from North America go to EMEA and APAC. We're also into Latin America and making a greater push into those efforts. With the follow the sun model, basically if we can perform some of these services remote and not be on site, we can have consultants or analysts working on problems throughout the night before the teams arrive in the morning, either on site or hand off to the other parts of the teams. We also integrate with our customer success group and our support teams. So not only is it our services that we offer, but it's all of McAfee's services that we integrate into our response efforts and successes. Industry verticals that we deal with government services or government entities, government contractors integrated and performing work for government entities, managed service providers, the financial sector, healthcare. We have hospitals, doctors, practices, and variety of electronic record storage in the healthcare sector or vertical. Manufacturing, we've had anything from production of electronics, or we deal with vendors or manufacturing efforts in electronics, the aero industry, automotive, a number of areas. And while I mentioned government above, it's federal, state, and local entities that we perform or render services to. Overall business impact in these verticals, there's going to be commonalities. So the response time. In order to respond to any incident, or not everything starts out as an incident, it starts out as some sort of event or suspicious activity that then is evaluated and then may turn into an incident. With that, response times, it varies depending upon clients and client maturity level. So in a case in which a client knows their infrastructure, has defined plans, defined communication aspects or methodologies, the response time can be much quicker. However, if there is not, and we'll go down to the timeline for the incident, but if these things aren't done from a proactive measure and building in advance of an incident, the costs are going to go up. So if security tools are not purchased in advance, there can be delays in a response effort because then they have to go through procurement or approval processes. If you don't have a defined incident response plan, then on the fly, you have to determine who you need to contact, who has authorization or privileges on certain systems, or even how do you find those systems? So costs can go up, and costs are not just tools and resources, but, well, I mean, they are resources, but if you don't have those resources prepared from in a proactive manner, it's going to delay the overall timeline for incident response. So not understanding the environment, which I covered before, it says determine type of infection. It's not just infections, it's malicious code, it's threats in the environment. So this can be either through a commodity-based attack, or it could be someone who has targeted your environment and may actively be in through remote access. So you have to determine the type of incident you're dealing with, and then what you're going to do to mitigate or contain and mitigate the risks. Ultimately, root cause. Quite often, our customers are like, okay, how did this happen? How did this happen? It takes time to come to that conclusion because you're following a trail of events. You're following a trail of artifacts. And in some recent cases, it's not just recent, this is not uncommon. There are many companies that don't have a SIM or a security operations center. So we're reconstructing events based on available data. So that available data may be if there's not firewall logs and event logs that have been forwarded to a central log aggregation tool and available through a SIM, then you have to reconstruct that information and that timeline and that takes a while to reconstruct. So I hate to say root cause. I like to say earliest known. In some cases, we can get back, or in many cases, we can see how something began, whether it was a compromise that came in through a Trojan, a remote access tool, lack of security on remote access points, or whether it be a brute force to um, an internet-facing RDP or terminal service access, or that a user has clicked on a link in an email that activates some sort of reverse shell back to the computer or drops malware on. So with all this, the overall message is preparation in advance to reduce the time to respond and reduce the costs during an incident. Attacker trends. We're seeing very sophisticated code being used in some environments, but much of the code that's being used is being reused time and time again by different threat actors, or they're using commonly available tools, whether it's psexec or PowerShell, in order to leverage legitimate tools that you will have in your environment or you may allow in your environment. So the use of psexec. psexec is a great tool for remote deployment of processes and tools or applications or programs in your environment. However, if you don't use it, why not block it through an access protection rule? And if you do use it, why not allow it at those times that you need it? Right now, Ryuk ransomware and other types of malicious tools are being deployed with psexec, so why not block it as a proactive measure if not needed? PowerShell, it's harder to block PowerShell because you have a number of legitimate applications that are using it, whether it's going to be an Exchange server or database, or you're going to see other types of tools out there that leverage it. But why not allow it to work where needed or allow by exception? I know it's a great tool for administration, but at least have an understanding of how you're using it. And if you're using version 1, I mean an older version of PowerShell, at least update it. Just have an understanding of it, and then also take a look at the risks that are associated with it. Access to environments. How do these actors get in? I mean, there's, as I said, there can be commodity based, but then again, we're seeing the actors come in directly through managed service providers or IT outsource companies. So you have to have a handle on your relationships to your vendors and the access into your environment. And everyone wants access, but it is the old model. I'm not old model. I mean, it's the thing that we've dealt with in security for years is access versus security. Your users want greater access, which you want to provide them, but you have to build security into it. So whether it's your user base or your contractor base, make sure that you have a handle. And some of it can be done through business agreements with them, but ultimately you have to make sure that they're responsible for their security also, because it could jeopardize yours. Ransomware, we're seeing Ryuk ransomware hitting since just before Thanksgiving. Ryuk has been hammering on people. Again, it's psexec is being used to deploy that in many environments. So simple, maybe not simple scans, but using your endpoint protection more effectively can reduce this. For blocking psexec with an access protection rule or PowerShell, there is the ability within endpoint security under exploit prevention to block malicious scripts. There is some tuning that may be required, but you can use the AMSI protection, the anti-malware protection, in order to reduce and mitigate risks in your environment. Banking Trojans, the malware Emotet, Dridex, TrickBot have been seen. There's a correlation that can be drawn as a precursor event to ransomware attacks. So they may be known historically as banking Trojans, but you want to make sure if you see an uptick of Emotet, Dridex, or TrickBot in your environment, to make sure you have a handle on it. And sometimes, from what we have seen, is there's a reluctance by some companies to deploy protections onto their servers because they're afraid of a business impact. And this could be um, your your Active Directory server, your domain controller. It could be a SQL server. It can be many things. But if you are not deploying some sort of protection out onto these servers, you are opening up a risk to the rest of your environment. So the logic of not putting security products onto servers in order for, I mean, for a company saying we don't want to impact our business or continuity of business operations is immediately and potentially impacting their business because they're left vulnerable. So you want to take a strategy overall of you want to work from your egress, your access to the internet, all the way down to your endpoints. So if you look at this as a funnel sort of approach, is let's do what you can do to block malicious traffic as it comes in through the web. There's going to be Word documents, PDFs, executables that can be filtered out because they're known bad immediately. Then if you use a gateway or a proxy, you can reduce your risk even further. So there's real-time behavioral tools that can be used as far as coming through the gateways, and then ultimately down to the endpoint. As tools are being dropped onto the endpoint, there's different types of tools. So there's exploit prevention, there's the ability to send the files to the ATD sandbox to be evaluated. And even if they're not in a signature, I mean, if there is no signature currently, this can help to put their reputation may be a very high risk. So for example, if in the world, this is the only place this file has been seen, it's going to have a low reputation. Now, there can be sometimes false positives to it, but you want to at least review those files, or if you have an automated tool to review them quickly, then you can reduce your risk even more. Overall, by assessing threats during an incident and putting in proper containment measures, you can see from the graphs how there was a spike on the left graph that went up considerably high. And then after the situation or the tools were identified, or malicious tools or malware were identified and blocks put in place, the activity dropped down. But on the right-hand side, there's one thing that you always have to take into consideration. If you're implementing some of these protections on a Friday or before a weekend, sometimes the systems don't receive the rules and they're powered off before they receive it. So on Monday morning, we see quite often an uptick in detections or blocks related to the policies, and then it comes back down. I was at a client site one time and the CISO was like, oh my gosh, it's happening again. I said, okay, let's put this into perspective. Let's look at the data. And it was indeed that we just went from like a Saturday and a Sunday and systems were turned off, but once they were powered on, the rules took effect. The eradication and mitigation efforts took hold, and then the numbers dropped down. You're always going to see detections in a network, and you should. You should expect to see them, because if you're connected to the internet, there's going to be threats continually, injected into your environment. So I mentioned before Ryuk a couple of times. There has been a trend to see Emotet, Dridex, and TrickBot, before ransomware attacks. So the customer verticals have been many. We've had manufacturing, financial, healthcare, government organizations. So you need to make sure that, as I said before, you have a deployment of your endpoint product out there, you're using it and leveraging it. But if you see an uptick in detections and cleans, I mean, it's great if they're being cleaned, but the other thing is, why is there all of a sudden a rise? So you want to make sure that any protections are out there. The malicious spam emails leverage macro-enabled documents, so you want to make sure that macros are disabled. Employees quite often are very helpful in re-enabling things that have been disabled if they have the ability. So you want to understand what's going on. But we have seen with the ransomware this trend over the last 2 years. So the verticals are many. It's across all the different verticals. And we've even seen iEncrypt related, I mean, Dridex and then iEncrypt with some customers. So overall, it's understanding what the threat is, and it's impacting customers all over. The propagation methods can be a little bit different. I mentioned the use of PSExec, the use of PowerShell, but there's other tools out there with PowerShell Empire. So if you're using the AMSI script blocks, or I mean blocking potentially malicious scripts from being used, you want to make sure that you're looking for any trends and taking a look to make sure that they were indeed blocked. And if they were, that's great. But if something does, if you move to an incident, forensics is essential to helping to understand the overall threats in the environment. With PowerShell, there's base 64 encoding. Basically, you take a readable text, you convert it and you obfuscate it by using base 64 encoding. But when PowerShell runs, it runs a command that basically says, okay, decode this, and then I'm going to run the script. So through the forensics, looking at whether it's your domain controllers or Active Directory servers, or looking on endpoints, looking for artifacts and remnants. One of the things that we've seen with PowerShell is you can also use, or under PowerShell Empire and PowerView, one of the tools under that tool set is you can also put in a command that says do not write to disk. So when we talk about fileless malware or things running within memory, even if it runs within memory, you may see indications through the event logs to give you an understanding of what has occurred. So forensics, having an understanding of forensics and where to and how to preserve the data and use it is essential. Overall, you take all the information that you learn, the IOCs that you learn, to help identify, contain, and mitigate the risks. And with that, there's different recommendations that can be made, and some of them I've already discussed related to blocking PSExec, scanning systems, mitigating risks by using your tools effectively for systems that are connected to the internet. Maybe one thing that I just thought about is if you're on an enterprise environment and you're protected by tools within the environment, for instance, a perimeter firewall, think of it this way. You probably have employees that leave the protected enclave and work on the road or work from home. So you also have to make sure that these systems for the users who are out on the road or maybe working from home are still protected. So they still have to have managed systems and they still have to communicate when they're on the road. So there's certain strategies that you should have in order to control those systems. And then also to have a host-based firewall on those systems to protect them when they're outside the enclave. Overall, common denominators we're seeing: lack of patching. We're still seeing WannaCry in customer environments. So simple patching would take care of some of the issues customers are seeing. It's on a lesser frequency, but there's still legacy systems out there. There's some patches for legacy systems, and there's no patches for others. In recent weeks, we're still having conversations, believe it or not, about Windows 95, Windows 2000. So in production environments, quite often there is the inability or the lack of funding to upgrade. So we're still running into those. We have to provide recommendations on network segmentation. How do you isolate these? Can you provide some sort of an application control product on these systems in order to mitigate the risk? Overall, the recommendation is they're unsupported legacy systems and they should be removed from the environment, but that's easier said than done when you're dealing with clients that may not have the resources to do it, or they may be using a legacy application. But even if you must use it in your environment, there are ways to maybe segregate or put these applications into virtual machines and keep them totally isolated from the network, because if not, they're going to provide vulnerabilities that you don't even want to experience. Lack of focused or regular scans. There's some companies that have decided not to scan their computers. Simple scans of the systems provide you with a level of protection. So still keeping full scans as part of uh, your response efforts, or even a proactive means of keeping your systems clean, should be considered. Don't exclude systems for coverage. If there are some efficiencies to be gained by exclusions that can be put in for mail servers or database servers, but you don't want to totally exclude the entire drive. So outdated signatures, one of the things we've seen is there may be a lack of updating. So making sure that the products that you own are up to date, your virus signatures or threat protection signatures, your IDS signatures are up to date. So you have the best stance possible on the defensive side. Again, I addressed before lack of understanding of one's own infrastructure. You need to prepare for this in advance. Lack of skill sets. Do you have people who can perform forensics? Do you have a company that you can bring in to help? Lack of an incident response plan. If you, and I've already discussed this early on, but if you do not have an incident response plan and know what the steps are and who to contact from the beginning, it is going to take you a longer time and put you at a greater deal or greater risk level. So lack of understanding of cybersecurity maturity. There's a number of models to score where you are, and assessments can be done to that end. Overall, some simple blocks that you may want to consider from an incident response side, and these are things that we put into play during an incident, is do you really need to have at the root or the open share on C or D executables running? We will put in recommendations to block applications and programs from running in the open shares to the extent possible, but we routinely see companies that are like, well, you know, our tech support wants to drop them there because it's a share and they have access to it. But at the same point in time, if you leave these places open, threat actors will exploit them. So tune your products to block what shouldn't be allowed, and whitelist or put in allowances for the programs that should be working in your environment or that are authorized. And I say authorized, there's a number of shadow security or shadow IT functions in companies in which process or response efforts by multiple people are accepted and not controlled. So you can't have, or you should not have, many people doing independent mitigation efforts there should be one team, one direction, so there's not a conflict. And I'll give you an example. We had a company that was asked, we were in the midst of an incident response. It was going great. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a second, your product's not working. Well, we found out that there was someone else within the company that decided they wanted to remove product to test things. Well, they were removing the ability to defend themselves while other parts of the IT organization had made their own decision to move forward with testing, and they were causing for or to allow the infection to go on and the spread of the malware. I had mentioned that WannaCry still is being seen. There are some simple blocks out there that you haven't put them in for WannaCry. Hopefully you don't need them. But if you're seeing detections for WannaCry to this date, there's some very simple blocks that can be put in place, but overall, patching is essential. And it's not just for WannaCry. If you're seeing coin miners in your environment, there's some of the same propagation methods that are used for coin miners than there is for WannaCry and some of the other malware that's been around for a while. So there's really little excuse to see some of these things in your environment. But then again, when I say little excuse, also understand there may be a lack of resources within companies. So do the best you can, put in the protections you can to move forward. For some very serious infections related to Emotet, the banking Trojan, we actually had some customers in which we had to stop all executables from being created within Windows, within System 32, Syswow 64 program data. However, these were limited blocks that were put into place, and you have to understand that there's a cause and effect for everything that you do. So while you may put in blocks or mitigation strategies to block malicious code, threat actors suspected in your environment, commodity malware, you also have to be ready for the fallout on a production side. So these blocks can be used effectively to stop something for a short term, but they will also block the ability for Windows to update and other legitimate processes from running. So whether it's psexec, PowerShell, blocking strategies, you want to have a full understanding of the cause and effect of what you're doing. Overall, our approach during an incident response effort is looking holistically, looking at your security posture, the scoping or reviewing to see the affected systems, and then putting together using forensic in order to reconstruct a timeline of events and to put in containment and mitigation strategies as we move forward. We routinely, and I know all of you have to deal with, or your management does, provide an incident management strategy and briefings to your C-levels or to your upper level management staff. This may even go as far as the board for your company, the CFO. People are paying for response efforts, so they want to understand what's going and what's the overall impact is. So you have to be ready for those briefings, but you also have to be able to have someone in your organization that can explain that you can't have a briefing every half an hour or every hour because you need time in order to react. So we've seen companies are like, okay, we want to have a briefing every 2 hours. And then they have a meeting to discuss things for every hour or for an hour time frame. So really you only have an hour to work in order to get to the next meeting. So we try to convey that briefings are needed. However, you need to have adequate time in order to prepare and to have something substantial or informative to provide to your upper level management. And that is always a delicate issue because they want to have an answer as soon as possible, but it takes time for all of these efforts to occur. Ensuring you have available tools and personnel and that they're deployed so the threat is eliminated. This goes towards the discussion on having an incident response plan and having people who are trained and capable of doing it. From our teams, we have a number of different skill sets that we can bring in, from incident response to reverse engineering, log analysis, and even product configuration and recommendations in order to maximize the efficiencies and reduce time overall in any response effort. So the same sort of things are going to apply for you as for preparation and response. Performing data analysis, discussed some of these things before, understanding how the malware is working in order to, or the malicious code, and to put those IOCs back into your defensive measures from your perimeter firewalls down through your NIDs, all the way down to your endpoint products. And some of it will also be user education. You have to stop your employees from cooperating by clicking on emails or clicking on links or turning off the auto run or auto play or enabling macros. Overall, it comes with a preparation and operationalizing industry best practices. And as you go through on the incident response side, you have to make sure that you have some sort of chain of custody process or tracking of where you're getting information from and maintaining the integrity. There's a number of companies that we're dealing with now that we're dealing with attorney-client privilege issues, or requirements, I guess I should say. And then also there are requirements that are going to be put out by insurance company for the cyber insurance that's out there. So make sure you have an understanding of what the requirements are. So as you collect data, that you're also collecting it and documenting it in a way in which your attorneys, your insurance company, and your internal security teams can utilize and go back to and recreate the events. Determine the technical root causes for the incident. That's something that is often hard to do in the midst of an incident, because when you're getting hit in the face with a, I don't know, I say like a fire hose analogy, you're getting hit in the face with a bunch of water and you're trying to look at an issue. So you're going to get hit with telephone calls, emails, briefing requests. So do the best you can to get to the technical root causes. However, some of this is going to happen post analysis. You'll do the best you can during the incident, but it's going to take a while to put together. Overall, having a mitigation strategy is going to be essential in implementing it, but as I said before, you may have to modify it because some of the efforts you put into place are going to prevent the business from operating or systems from updating. So you're going to have to engage and disengage certain security security measures that you've put in place. You're going to have to act as a coordinator between your company and third parties. If you have an incident response company coming in, or if you're dealing with the MSP and you're trying to get things done, you're going to have a lot of different things going on. Ultimately, and whether it's McAfee products or other products, utilize what you own. Because if you're all of a sudden going to buy a new product in the midst of an incident trying to fix something, you may already have everything you need. You just may not fully understand how to leverage it. So those are the types of things that we help out or that we assess during an incident. I mean, overall, and I'll just sum up things, is, having proper scan policies is, it says remediation recommendations, but these are also proactive recommendations. Make sure that you have products deployed, that you're doing the proper scans, have policies refined and tuned before an incident, as well as after or during an incident, cleaning up based on the IOCs that are developed.
And then overall, have training for your employees, because it's easy to tell somebody something to do, but it's not so easy to sometimes identify what the needs are before the incident. So take the lessons learned and roll that back into training efforts and how best to identify threats in your assets, asset management tracking. Look at the CIS 20. There's a couple of great points right in the beginning of that you should be looking at, and have proactive programs for threat intelligence, threat hunting, construction of the IR development plan, and revision of it. It's not just one plan. None of these things are static. They are ongoing, and you must always revise them and revise them on a regular basis.
Thank you, Jim. Great information. I really appreciate it. Taking your time to come in today. As you guys know, McAfee has done a lot in the self-service space already. We are expanding our customer self-service capabilities, including, but not limited to, our McAfee Enterprise Support app for Android and iOS, new product support pages, the support community, McAfee Support YouTube channel, social media help needs on Facebook and Twitter, and the EPO Support Center plugin is available for you to download with your EPO application free of cost. You can learn more about the EPO Support Center on the McAfee Support YouTube channel and on support.mcafee.com. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to Jim. Together is power. This concludes today's webinar.